Do you love spy books, movies, and TV? Then the Spybrary podcast is for you. Since 2017, host Shane Whaley and Spybrary field agents around the world dispatch reviews and interviews with authors, historians, and fellow spy fans. We discuss everything from John le Carré, Len Dayton, Paul Viddich, Graham Greene, Nick Herron, Charles Cumming, Ben McIntyre, and many more. Spybrary is available on all good podcast apps and at spybrary.com.
Hello and welcome to Spybrary episode 190. Today we are talking all about a book called A Spy in Plain Sight, the inside story of the FBI and Robert Hanssen, America's most damaging Russian spy. It's written by Lis Wiehl, who is the New York Times bestselling author, acclaimed legal analyst, former federal prosecutor, daughter of an FBI agent, and now the author of her 20th book. Welcome to Spybrary.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Shane. And congratulations. Over 190 episodes. That's pretty amazing.
Thank you. It's a labor of love. We thoroughly enjoy doing it. And one of the passions of the Spybrary project is sharing good books with our listeners and our community. And
right.
I have to say, it's interesting with Robert Hanssen. So as you can tell by my accent, I'm British. I didn't know a great deal about him until I moved here. And I asked a few friends of mine, hey, do you know who Robert Hanssen is? And I was surprised how many actually turned in. And these are educated, intelligent people who said, yeah, and outside of the Spybrary community who were like, no, who is he? And I said, okay, you need to go read this book and do some history here. And it's interesting because a couple of weeks ago, we interviewed Charlotte Philby, who is Kim Philby's granddaughter and an author herself. And one of my questions to her was, did you not think about changing your name, Charlotte? I mean, in the UK, Philby's a pretty dirty word in the same way that I think Hansen is for yourself, Lis. And Charlotte said to me, well, you know, when I was growing up, not that many people knew about Kim Philby, which to me is outrageous, right? It's outrageous, but there are people out there that don't know. So great that you've written this book. And I guess my first question is, what intrigued you about Robert Hanssen? Because quite a few books have been written about him. There's been Hollywood movies, and we all know what Hollywood's like, right? The fairy tales and whatsoever. So what was it that intrigued you about writing, or what encouraged you, inspired you to put, was it two years of research into this book?
2 years of research. I mean, and you said it, Shane, in the intro. I'm the daughter of an FBI agent. I grew up around the FBI and stories. You know, my dad would always tell stories at night. And of course, I realized as I got older, there were stories about, you know, real cases and cops and robbers and all that kind of stuff, and wearing the white hat. And I was so admiring of my dad, and still am. After he became an FBI agent, he was a federal prosecutor. So I'm third generation federal prosecutor. So wow. I kind of have that in my blood. My mother was an English teacher. She immigrated from Denmark, but she got her PhD in English and became an English teacher. So I think between my dad's stories and my mom constantly, correcting my grammar, that I was destined probably to be a federal prosecutor, and then eventually to write books and mysteries, and then these real life books about real people. And Hansen in particular interested me. I mean, I heard about him like you and your friends. But for my dad, he was just such a black mark against the FBI. I mean, how could this happen? How could this, regular guy become an FBI agent and then spy for the Russians? I mean, just blatantly spy, make tons of mistakes. He's not, wasn't the best spy in the world. And yet he remained undercover, remained out of sight of the FBI, out of their lair, basically. For all those many years, and the secrets he sold, the people he gave up to the Russians, that were killed. I mean, there's blood on his hands. He may not have pulled the trigger himself, but there's blood on his hands. And so I thought, what an intriguing character. Because, as a writer, you're always looking for interesting character and interesting stories. And I thought, well, with 20 years of hindsight now from his arrest and, incarceration in Florida, in the Florence, Colorado Supermax, that the people that were involved at the most intricate level with him would have interesting stories to tell with hindsight of history, with hindsight of that 20 years. And so that's how I got started. That's how I got started, Shane. It just seemed like such an interesting character and an interesting story that needed to have some fresh light to it.
Absolutely. And that was one of the questions from many in our community when I mentioned that I was reading the book and, okay, what's new in it? We kind of know that history. So good that you're explaining that for our listeners. And also this book is very much, how did he do it and at what cost? And when you read this book, it's almost like a Hollywood movie, because I keep asking myself, how can he get away with this? And I mentioned Kim Philby and what Philby got up to. You're like, how on earth can someone get away with this in the intelligence services? So I'm curious about his motivating factors, because I don't want to keep comparing him with Philby, but Philby was a communist, right? He believed in the cause, and that's why he sold his country out. But I was surprised with Hansen that he was a strict conservative, so very pro-life, considered communism and the Russians to be godless, yet he sold his country out for them. So what were his motivations?
I mean, you got it exactly right. His outward persona was Russians are godless, they're commies. He was in the top level of the counter-espionage in the Russian unit for the FBI. So all outwardly appearances were, he would never be a spy, especially for the Russians. But motivation, okay, well, we can tick them off. And then I want to talk to you about them at the end by ticking these off. Money, he needed money. A devout Catholic, he married Bonnie Hansen. She was Catholic. He converted. They had a bunch of kids. He wanted to send them to parochial schools. Parochial schools ain't cheap. And then when he moved to New York, when he moved from Chicago to New York, he went to Scarsdale, which is a very affluent, suburb and close to New York, the city. And that was unusual. And I could tell you from personal experience, I know that to be unusual, because when my dad, they transfer these FBI agents around a lot. When my dad was transferred to the New York office, he quit and he became a federal prosecutor in Washington State. The reason being, he said, I've got this little girl. I've got, a wife. I need to support them. And the only way I can do that in New York on an FBI salary is to live 2 hours outside of the office and, do a 4-hour commute. I'm not going to do that. But Hansen, got this very expensive place. He's got to pay for it. Bonnie's not making much money. He's got to pay for it. So there's money, but that's not enough. Shane, we all know people like this. He always fancied himself to be the smartest guy in the room. He knew everything about you guys. You ask Hansen, he'll tell you. He knows everything about everything. But when he gets into the FBI, they're not so enamored with him. He's kind of strange. They call him a mortician. He's always wearing black and very dour expression, kind of whispers. And so he wasn't feeling the love from his other FBI agents. They weren't sort of patting his back and saying how great he was. So he's a disgruntled employee, right? From his best friend, Jack Hoschauer, I learned about this James Bond fixation, basically, since he was a kid. He wanted to be glamorous. He wanted to save the damsels. He wanted the gadgets. He wanted to have all the excitement. But his real life, he was anything but that in real life. He's just not a very exciting guy, didn't socialize. So you had all of these factors. And I think that's really what contributed most significantly to all of those other things. But when I tick these elements off, and narcissist, complete narcissist, we know people like that. These aren't such unusual motivations, right? The difference is that the people we know probably don't have access to top level secret information about the Russians. So it was just sort of interesting from a psychological point of view to me that, he has all these different motivations and they're unique to him, but they're not unique to mankind, right?
Yeah. And he was a bit of a weirdo, wasn't he? Like you write in the book that he had some sexual stuff going on that was, well, I consider to be bizarre. I'm not sure in the real world today if it is, but
I think it's kind of bizarre. My real world is kind of bizarre. I don't know where you are, but
I'm in Vermont. They're crazy here, I could tell you.
Vermonters are great. But no, I mean, for example, he would send pictures, and this is supposedly devout Catholic, Opus Dei, goes to mass every day, right? He would send pictures to Jack Hoschauer, who was fighting in Vietnam, of Bonnie, nude. I mean, Jack opened this up and it's like, what the heck, am I getting here? Yeah. And then when Jack came back, he said, you can join us, or there's a little peephole in the shower. You can watch Bonnie showering. He put her, kind of made porn movies of her, unbeknownst to her. I mean, she would never have agreed to that. And he may or may not have had a mistress. It's unclear whether they actually consummated the relationship, but he certainly strayed. And, that's not really keeping with what we would think good Christian values are about, right?
Yeah. There were many, he's like a 7-layer cake with his personality, right? When you think about it.
Yes. Well, you know what? I spoke with a psychiatrist because there was a psychiatrist that was assigned to him, saw him, a couple times a week for about a year before his sentencing. And the psychiatrist said, this guy, Hansen, is able to compartmentalize in a way that the psychiatrist had never seen before. That he could, live this Opus Dei life, be an FBI agent, but compartmentalize spying for the Russians. And he almost justified it to himself in his mind. This is the psychiatrist telling me this, by thinking, if I show the Russians where our weaknesses are, they'll realize we're not really that bad of people. They'll go easier on us. So it'll actually wind up being better for America. That's crazy thinking. I mean, loony thinking. But I'm telling you what the psychiatrist told me about Hansen.
So how did he initially contact the Soviets?
He sent a letter. They didn't contact him, which is kind of a crucial point. They didn't recruit him. He sent a letter to a guy named Cherkashin, who became his handler, saying, he didn't identify himself as a Robert Hanssen or FBI agent. He just said, I've got this information, this intel for you, and you can verify it, and I know it to be true. And it was a really good, in quotes, information for the Russians because it was the identity of one of our top Russian assets, a guy named Polyakov. We called him Top Hat was his name. And Russian assets or Russian, North Korean, Chinese assets, they're critical for us to get information on the ground about what's happening. Politicians and drones and all of that can really only do so much. You need actual people there in these countries that are not our allies to tell us about what's going on in the intelligence world. And so he turned over this information about Polyakov. This is my first chapter. They execute him in the most heinous of ways. They videotape it to deter other people from doing the same thing. And then Hansen's off and running to the races with the Russians. Oh, and by the way, when I said that the FBI didn't appreciate him, the Russians were exactly the opposite. They sent flowery letters of admiration and love. Oh, dear friend, we'll take care of you forever and all this kind of, junk. But they played him really well because that's what he wanted and wasn't getting at work.
Yeah, that was a really good part of the book is you published some of those letters. It was fascinating to read those and the way they communicate with each other. And I think also you talking about him being arrogant and be the smartest guy in the room. What kind of raised my eyebrows is when he was lecturing the Soviets about dead drops and saying, no, I'm not going there because of A, B, and C. You guys are doing it all wrong. It's like they're to your James Bond fantasy almost, right?
Yeah, no,
yeah. With him.
Exactly. And Hansen was in charge the whole time. I mean, he would tell them just exactly you said. He would tell them, we're doing it this way. Here's how it's going to happen. I mean, there were low-tech drops. It's basically a piece of white tape on a tree in a park that was either vertical or horizontal, depending on whether it was a drop or a pickup. Low-tech stuff. But still, Hansen had to be in charge. He was kind of a control freak. And they were getting great information from him. So they were happy to abide by his rules. They didn't even know, the Russians didn't even know Hansen's identity until after we arrested him. That's crazy to me, but that's the truth.
Did he give any signs of traitorous actions at work or at home?
No, he tried to cover it up. I mean, he made mistakes. Like I'll give you a couple. The first is with Bonnie, his wife. He left a bunch of cash in a sock drawer. And so Bonnie sees his cash in the sock drawer and she has a suspicion that he's got a mistress and the cash is for the mistress. So she goes to Hansen and says, what the heck is this about? And it basically, it sounds like I'm telling a joke. He says, no, honey, that's okay. It's not for a mistress. I'm just spying for the Russians. Crazy. And so Bonnie says, let's go to our priest and find out what to do. They go to the priest. This is unbelievable to me. They go to the priest, and Hansen says, here's what I did. And the priest basically says, spying bad, don't do it again, but I'll absolve you of everything if you just give the money that you got from your spy, your ill-gotten means, to the church. And then you can go on your merry way. And that's what they did. So he got away with it. He stopped for a little bit and they started again. So that was a mistake. He made mistakes at work. He hacked into one of his colleagues' computers. And everybody said, what the heck? You can't be hacking into, other agents' computers. What are you doing? That's very suspicious. And Hansen said, no, I'm the IT guy. I'm the computer guy, which he was. He was kind of the computer nerd guy. And they were happy to let him do that because most FBI agents really couldn't give two fiddles about computers. They want to be out there making arrests and knocking down doors. But Hansen did all of that. And so he said, no, I was just hacking in to show you how weak our system is. And now I can fix it. And they bought it. Yeah. They bought that. This is the FBI. Come on, guys.
Yeah. Incredible. And I often say we have a lot of fiction authors that come on the show in our community. And I often say, read non-fiction spy, because very often spy truth is stranger than spy fiction. You might read that in a spy novel and go, really, as if. But no, this happened.
This happened. If you were trying to sell this to, mentioned Hollywood earlier as a fiction, I think they'd say, oh, it's too far-fetched. The guy would have been caught. There's no way he would have lasted 20 years, next, and they wouldn't take it. But this really happened. And, there's a lot of reasons for that. I think the main one, and now these agents, who eventually found him have now had this hindsight, they realize it too. And they're reluctantly say, yeah, we didn't want to think that it was one of our own, right? Once you're in the FBI, you are trusted. And trust is necessary, obviously. You're putting your life on the line. You need your colleagues to have your back, literally, with a gun. So we trusted him. We thought it was somebody in the CIA. And so they targeted someone in the CIA, initially. But I think that was a big blind spot for the FBI over the years. They thought he was quirky. They thought he was weird, antisocial. But it never occurred to anybody that he could be spying for the Russians.
Yeah. And I guess that this was an era where there wasn't that many experts with computers and IT, right?
Exactly.
So talking about the CIA, actually, before we move on to that, there was another interesting story that you wrote about, which, again, this is not about him being a traitor, but why he should have been drummed out the FBI. Can you share with us one occasion when he really badly treated his secretary?
It's awful. To set the scene, he is now a boss, right? He's got secretaries and other agents beneath him that work for him. And he called in one of these secretaries, I think it was 4:30 in the afternoon. I may get the minutes off just a little bit, but the point is she had to run for a bus. She lived not close by. It's DC. Everybody's, commuting on buses and subways. And she had to get that bus. So she said, I really can't talk to you, but for a minute, I really need to go. I've got to catch this bus. Hansen grabs her and by her account, drags her, along the hall. Drags her. That's assault. And the FBI and Mike Rochford, the main guy who targeted him and led the investigation, said to me, they didn't say it at the time, but he said to me, the FBI got that wrong. And we really owe that woman an apology.
Yes.
They just kind of said, okay, this is one story. He said, she said, you're both out of the office, for a few days. But that was it. You have an FBI agent that acts that way in the office. Those kind of anger issues. That doesn't ring any bell. And he's just allowed to keep going on.
That was a shocker when I read that chapter.
Yeah.
That was a sign. And then didn't his brother-in-law spot something and report it in?
Yes.
His brother-in-law again.
Mark Walk, right? The brother of Bonnie, knew about the sock drawer story, knew that they're at a certain point that they were, having a mole hunt and put some things together because Bonnie said to him, oh, just casually, Bob's thinking about retiring to Poland. This is the middle of the Cold War. And you got an FBI agent that's thinking about retiring to Poland, and he's got this extra cash in his sock drawer. That was very, very concerning to Mark. So in the book, I have a chapter where Mark takes his concerns to his supervisor, Jim Lyle, and tells Lyle what he thinks. He doesn't say, I know my brother-in-law is a spy, but he says, this happened, this conversation, this happened with the money in this conversation. I know you're looking for a mole. You might want to look at Hansen. And Lyle, according to Walk, the brother-in-law, didn't do anything with it. Now, Lyle has a little bit different story. Lyle says, well, Walk didn't really say that. He was, a very casual conversation. It wasn't a big deal, so I didn't follow up. But again, it was a lost opportunity, and one of the new things that I did find, and it hasn't been published before, was correspondence between Mark Walk and the CIA agent, Brian Kelly, who they initially targeted, emails back and forth with them that had never been published. And it kind of gives a more depth to the story and also tells it from a dead man's perspective, because Brian Kelly is no longer with us.
Yeah, that's a real tragedy, what happened to him. And I felt very sorry for him when I read the book. So that's a situation where the FBI identified him wrongly as the mole. So they knew there was a mole, right? And they had this big mole hunt.
They realized that there was a mole. Rochford did, because kind of woke up one day and said, holy darn. You didn't really say darn. All our Russian assets are dead. So somebody's telling them something. There must be a mole, because that's inside information. And that's when they started putting people together. They put them in this room called the vault room, and they came up with a matrix to try to figure out who it was. And they targeted the CIA agent, Brian Kelly.
And part of that, you feel, is because the FBI were blinded that this couldn't possibly be one of ours. This must
100%.
be one of theirs. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Kelly was a very good CIA agent, and he was involved in a lot of the cases that there had been a mole, intruding into. But he also hadn't been involved in others, so they just glommed onto the fact that it's not an FBI agent. It's got to be a CIA agent. And they arrested Brian Kelly. His daughter was working at the CIA at the time. They trotted the daughter out of the building. They talked to his wife. They interrogated his son. I mean, it was awful. It was front page news everywhere. And I spoke with his second wife, Patricia McCarthy, who is actually a trial lawyer herself, and she said, it just broke him. It broke him. She blames the FBI for his early death. I don't blame her.
Not at all. Not at all. So how was he finally? How did they finally realize that it was Hansen?
Well, Rochford, the guy that was leading the investigation, got a lucky break from one of his Russian sources. They decided to put some money out there, in the Russian world, to see whether they could nab somebody to tell them who the mole was. And he got somebody for the price of $7 million and witness protection, right? It's kind of ironic because, Hansen never got near $7 million, but this guy, to tip them off as to who it was, got the $7 million. So in the information that he gave over, the most important thing was an audio cassette with Hansen talking to Cherkashin, his handler. And the FBI agents listened to this audio. And as I said, Hansen had kind of a distinct voice, sort of whispering, and they were like, just, oh my gosh, somebody we never would have thought of. This is Robert Hansen's voice. And so they realized they had him, but they had a problem because they couldn't very well put up the source. The source didn't want to testify in court. The source had gotten paid $7 million for the information. So there would be all sorts of cross-examination about that they didn't have enough to win it in a case at a court of law for espionage. And to make matters worse, Hansen was looking down at 4 months before he was supposed to go with a mandatory retirement. Mandatory. So they had 4 months to try to sort of sting operation up and get this guy. And as many faults as the FBI had before, this about not looking internally, turning their eye, all that. When they figured it out, they were great. They were super. They were what you think the FBI should be. They set up a sting operation that was fantastic. They gave Hansen another job for his last 4 months, put him in a different building, which they had bugged really quickly, had done that. They gave him an assistant who was part of the team, who was read into the team, who could tell everybody about what he was saying. They searched his car. They searched, everything. And they knew obviously it was him, but they wanted to get him to make one more drop, have him make one more drop. And Hansen did. Hansen made one more drop. The FBI knew about it because of the sting operation, and they were there to arrest him. It was very dramatic. I mean, I have the pictures. Some of the pictures are in the book. They take him down, literally just take him down. And he says, "What took you so long?"
Wow.
I mean, airing it to the end, right?
Yeah. Incredible. Again, like something you'd expect from Hollywood. But
it's real life.
Yeah, real life. And then in terms of he's arrested, does he plead guilty? Does he just say, "Yeah, you got me"? Or how does that work?
It takes a while, and it's part the government's issue there, because under the Espionage Act, you can be, put to death. And so the Attorney General at the time had to make a very hard decision about whether or not to go for an execution of Hansen or to go for, they had him dead to rights. They got him at the drop, right? So he could try to plead insanity. Other than that, nothing was going to fly. I don't think that would have flown either. But they went for life without possibility of parole, and they didn't charge Bonnie in exchange for Hansen and Bonnie being debriefed many, many, many times so that they could get any more information that Hansen might have on him. We can debate whether that was the right move or not. Some would say he should have been executed. Others would say, look, the time he's spending in this Florence Supermax, he gets 23 hours a day solitary confinement. And the 1 hour he's out, he can be hanging around with the Unabomber and El Chapo. So it's not a great life. And some would say it's worse than even just executing him. That's a philosophical discussion, but that's what they decided at the time.
Am I right in understanding that he is not able to give interviews? His wife is not able to give interviews as part of their...
Per the plea agreement. Yeah.
Right. That's frustrating, right? If you could ask him one question, Lis, what would you ask him?
Why? I'm positing all these motives, but now that he's had 20 years there, why? And I'd say, why? And would you do it again?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Right? What kind of person is this? But that's the thing with criminals. You really have to get into their minds to understand them. They don't think like you and I do. We're law-abiding people. But as a prosecutor, I learned that. You really have to think, what motivates him? Why did he do this? And I came up with all these interviews, these firsthand source interviews, to those conclusions of those 3 or 4 things that I think were at least the primary motivators for him.
Yeah. What did the FBI then do as a result of they've caught Hansen? As you say, he's America's most damaging spy. Huge security lapses. What did they then do to prevent this from happening again?
Yeah, and that's a little bit scary, because I will tell you, in all of my interviews that I did over the span of 2 years, I asked the same question of these agents and operatives. I said, could there be another Hansen today? And 100% of them said yes. And then many, unprompted by me, followed up with, and there probably already is. So these are men and women that would know. And these are men and women that have seen what the FBI has done, to try to, stop this. Like, they've implemented polygraphs. Hansen went 20 years without a polygraph. When I was a federal prosecutor for 5 years, I knew I could be polygraphed at any moment. It was just drug tested at any moment. I didn't eat poppy seed bagels because they can, show up as opium. You just know that as a federal servant, right? At any moment you can be polygraphed or drug tested. Never happened with Hansen. Never happened. Why did they check his financials? Now financials are checked a lot more. Security clearances are updated. Every 5 years, federal prosecutors get brand new security clearances. They have to go and interview new people, the old people, because things can change in your life. 5 years ago, you weren't susceptible to blackmail. Now you might be. So they didn't do that with Hansen. I am told that all of those things have been implemented, and yet my sources say, and there probably already is.
Yeah, terrifying.
It is pretty terrifying.
The only thing that makes that less depressing for me is, do we have someone who's in Putin's cabinet meetings? Do we have someone over there who's doing exactly the same thing and giving us the information we need now about Ukraine? That's the only thing that makes this
because
a little bit more
that's the point with Hansen, right? He got all of those people that we had, sitting there and having Putin's ear, for example, he got them killed.
Yeah.
So it's sad for their families and sad for them, obviously, and also horrible for our intel, because we need people like that who are, spying for us. It's just how it's done. But we certainly don't need any spies within our own agencies.
Final question for you, Lis. What was the most shocking thing for you, or the most surprising thing when you were going through this research and interviewing many of the people who were involved? What was the one thing that really surprised you?
I think it was that last point, which is that even after all of these things have been implemented, polygraphs, drug tests, financial disclosures, new security clearances, that not one of all the people I interviewed said, oh no, it could never happen again. They all said, oh yeah, definitely. That to me, as a daughter of an FBI agent, former federal prosecutor, that's dang scary.
Yeah.
We need to wake up, and as a public, we need to read these books. We need to know that this could be happening. We need to put pressure on the FBI to not get lax about this, not get into that whole trust everybody, trust but verify, to coin that phrase, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you've opened up so many things for me in my own personal reading. Like I say, I'm British, so I know about the Cambridge lot, but now I'm reading about the submarine spy couple, Aldrich Ames, and it wasn't just Hansen. There were others out there that were, embedded. And you watch a show like The Americans, and again, you think, oh yeah, it's great fiction, but it's far-fetched. And it's like,
not really.
Read this. Is it really far-fetched? Because this is what went down.
I mean, the Maryland couple is a great example. That just happened, 6-9 months ago, something like that.
Yeah.
We don't know if they're going to get a plea or if they're awaiting trial. They're just haven't heard about them in a while. But here's a guy that was selling, top secret naval secrets. Now he sold them. He gave them to, I believe, Brazil is the country, and Brazil is not an enemy of ours. So they said, "Hey, knock knock, U.S. This guy's trying to do this," and FBI did a sting operation and caught him. But the fact is, it's happening. It's happening this year. It's happening. So we really need to be aware of it. I'm not trying to make people paranoid, but just aware, know that this is a potential issue.
Absolutely, to be aware of it. But also, I have to say, it's fascinating reading. I mean, it's a gripping read. It's a thrilling read. But you just have to pinch yourself that you're not reading a John le Carre novel sometimes, that this is actual real life. Marvelous. Well, Lis, thank you very much for joining us on the Spybrary podcast. Your book is available in all good bookshops everywhere. And I recommend all our listeners go and get it, especially if you're not that familiar with Hansen, which apparently quite a few people aren't. So it's essential reading. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Shane. I really appreciate having me on the show.
Wow. I hope you enjoyed that. Wow. I thoroughly enjoyed that conversation with Lis Wiehl. There was a lot in this book that I learned. And I know quite a few of you are like, yeah, I've read some of these books on Hansen before. Do I really want to read another one? I think what Lis is saying is it's 20 years on, and there are things that have come out since then. And Lis does a lot of research interviewing people that were part of the investigation or worked with him or knew the family. And there's quite a bit in there about Opus Dei. 30 Minutes with Lis did not do this book justice. So I hope it's piqued your interest. And as I said on this show, and I've repeatedly said, these real life accounts of real spies, if you read them in a novel, you'll see them on a movie or a TV series, you might think it's far-fetched. I mean, the thought of, a bit like Philby, that walking out with a briefcase full of documents, and Hansen, this was the days before thumbnail drives, was Xeroxing secret documents and, walking out of the offices with them. So pretty incredible, really. So I really recommend the book. If you've enjoyed today's show, if you like our output, I would love it if you leave us a rating or review on the podcast app of your choice. And if you want more Spy Chat, come and join us in our community. It's over 5 years old now, several thousand of us in there. It will absolutely devastate your bank account because there are so many recommendations, but they're quality recommendations that you get. And you can find the community at spybrary.com/Facebook. So until next time, take care.
Thanks for listening to the Spybrary podcast. You don't have to wait for the next episode. Join the conversation happening now at facebook.com/Spybrary and on Twitter @Spybrary.